Later, when I found out that I had succeeded, my mother kicked me out of her new family. When I refused, she showed up and demanded to provide for my siblings' college tuition. She hit me, so the context is that my mother gave birth to me when she was 20 years old and my biological father never appeared in my life. My mother told me that he never wanted to have children with her, and since they had only been together for a few months when she became pregnant, she gave him the option to leave when she became pregnant. She told me that she broke up with him very painfully, and that's why she decided not to ask for any support from him, and he wasn't willing to provide any either, so it was convenient for them to simply stop talking. Fortunately, my grandparents were very supportive of her and stayed by her side so that she could finish school and get a job. And then, when I was about 8 years old, she finally started dating Harry. She had worked with him for a while, and they dated for almost 3 years before she married Harry. I got along well with Harry. We didn't have a particularly deep relationship, but he didn't dislike me, and we got along well. For years after they got married, my mom got pregnant, and everyone was happy about it, including me. In hindsight, I probably should have seen what was coming, but I was so sure that my mother would always support me no matter what, after all the hardships she had gone through raising me, that she obviously wasn't going to let it all go to waste and abandon me. Even when we started to drift apart, and she became very distant after she got married, I thought it was just a temporary phase and that everything would be fine. So I did my best to be there for her during her pregnancy, but as soon as I was around, she would become very irritable. So I decided to keep a low profile and stay out of her way as much as possible. But I guess I wasn't subtle enough, because 6 months after she gave birth to twins, she and Harry told me that they wanted to have a serious talk with me. They told me that they couldn't let me live at home now that they had 2 children to take care of. I had just turned 16 and was still a minor, so they couldn't legally evict me without getting into trouble, so they tried to gently remind me that their limited income made it difficult to support our extended family. To be honest, I thought it was impossible for 2 adults, a teenager and 2 babies, to be supported on the income of 2 web developers, and they had always been able to provide us with a fairly comfortable lifestyle. So it seemed to me that they were bluffing and just wanted me to move out. But even so, I tried to make some suggestions to prevent this from happening, because I really didn't want to move out. I tried to tell them that if money was an issue, I could get a job. But my mother told me that what she wanted most was to save money and other resources for the children, because they needed them more at that time. She was referring to the twins, and she didn't say that they needed them more, but that they needed to be with their parents more than I did. I just needed to hear that to make up my mind to leave, because I was obviously not welcome. They didn't even tell me where I should go after I left. They just nudged me in the right direction, because they wanted me to go. They knew I had enough self-respect to realize that I wasn't welcome, so their plan was technically successful, because they didn't force me, but in reality I don't think it made much difference, because they had backed me into a corner and left me with no choice. After leaving that day, I went straight to my grandparents' house. They were very unhappy with my mother's actions, but they didn't break off relations with her because they still wanted to look after the twins. My grandparents were old, so I obviously couldn't rely on them financially, and I had to find a part-time job when I was 16. I occasionally saw my mother and Harry, who visited my grandparents with the children, but they rarely asked about me and were mostly polite to me even when they saw me. They didn't seem to miss me at all, and they seemed happier even without me living with them. My mother also seemed less irritable than before, which made me very sad, but there was nothing I could do about it. I stayed with my grandparents until I was due to go to university, and even then my mother had nothing to do with me. I had to rely on a few friends to help me adapt to dorm life, because my grandparents were obviously no longer young and their health did not allow them to do it. I had to apply for a student loan, and even had to ask one of my relatives to be a joint signatory for this, because my mother and Harry refused for the same reason they had kicked me out of the house. They wanted to save resources and money for their children, as they had had twins late in life, and I was lucky that an uncle came to my rescue and agreed to be a joint signatory, as long as I promised him that he would never actually have to pay anything. So I worked while finishing my university studies to ensure that I would not be in debt after graduation and to get a financial head start after starting university. I hardly ever got in touch with my mother anymore, and even when I graduated, only my grandparents were there, and my mother didn't even bother to congratulate me. After university, I started working and living independently because I didn't want to be a burden on my elderly grandparents anymore. The first few years were very difficult because I didn't earn much, but I had to pay rent, groceries, and utilities, and even started to reduce my income debt while also ensuring that I saved for the future. I think this is what I mean when I say that I had a limited income, but fortunately, things are different now. I worked my way up in the company step by step, which was not easy, and it took a long time, but now I am in a relatively comfortable situation. I don't want to go into the details, but I'm proud of what I've achieved, especially considering that I've hardly had any help from anyone. Life is good, and surprisingly, despite not having been in touch for many years, my mother found out about it. I'm almost 33 now, and I hold a senior management position at the company where I started. About 4 months ago, I was promoted, which is a huge honor, but few people know about it because I don't want to make a fuss. One of the people I did tell was my uncle, as I wanted to thank him for co-signing my loan application at the time when I was struggling to find a way to pay for my university fees. As far as I know, he recently met my mom and Harry at a family gathering and asked her to contact me so she could finally congratulate me after all these years of not contacting me, as I had finally succeeded in life. I'm sure his intentions were good and in the right place, but the result was counterproductive because she didn't congratulate me at all in any way. Anyway, the bottom line is that my mother found out about this, and she recently showed up at my house with Harry and demanded to speak to me. As I mentioned, I haven't had contact with her since I went to college, and after graduation I decided that I wanted my mom to come around and try to make peace with me someday, so I blocked her out completely and stopped contacting her. And she didn't seem to have any complaints. Honestly, I don't even think she noticed. I hardly have any contact with my family, except for my grandparents, and they have long since understood that I don't like to talk about my mother, so they don't talk about her with me either. As for my uncle, I also don't keep in touch with him, so I really didn't know that my mother and Harry have been in a very bad financial situation for the past few years. I only found out recently when they showed up at my house and started telling me about all the hardships they have been going through. I let them in for only one reason. I thought they had come to make up with me, but I guess that was just wishful thinking on my part. Instead of congratulating me on my success, they were surprised that I hadn't told them about the promotion I'd received from my uncle, and that I was one of the youngest people in the company to get it. It was funny, because I was surprised that they expected me to talk to them after all these years without contact, let alone expect me to tell them good news about my life and career. They even told me that they were quite disappointed that I had excluded them from my life simply because they had decided to spend more time with their children, who needed time, money, and resources more than I did, because they needed them and I, as a teenager, did not. They said that they had hoped that I would have been mature enough to understand why they had changed their priorities, but instead of supporting their decision, I had started to distance myself from them after I had moved in with my grandparents. I don't even know why. I supported their decision to kick me out of the house, but years later, they still start our meetings like this, trying to convince me that I'm the bad guy because I'm upset about their decision to kick me out of the house so they can be alone with their kids. And then they don't even give me a chance to say what I think, but quickly turn the conversation to how hard the past few years have been for them, and they start talking about how they started their own business, but unfortunately, it failed, and they're in, and now they were trying to recoup their losses, but unfortunately, the twins were also at an age where they needed to think about things like university, and they needed money to pay for both children's expenses. They needed it as soon as possible, and that's when I finally began to realize why they had come to me, because they needed money, and they didn't waste any time getting to the point. They didn't even try to sugarcoat things, saying that at first they were very angry when they found out that I was doing well and hadn't contacted them, but I could make up for their losses by funding my siblings' education. I couldn't believe their audacity in trying to make me feel like they were doing me a favor by letting me pay for the university fees of 2 children I didn't even know because I had abandoned them. So I told them straight away that I wasn't going to do anything. They thought they could manipulate me like that. It was offensive. I lost my temper with them. I reminded them that the reason I had to pay for my studies and work while at university was because they refused to help me financially, simply because they wanted to save money for their children's future, because they were worth more than me. That was their view at the time, and I never questioned it, and I never bothered them after they made it clear that they wanted to prioritize their twins over me. But now that they have chosen who they want to prioritize and have even thrown me out, refusing to keep in touch with me for all these years, they have no right to expect anything from me, let alone financial support, and they don't even have the right to expect me to speak to them again. I told them that since they wanted to save their money and resources for the child who truly deserved it, they could now use the money they saved by kicking me out to pay for their college instead of trying to emotionally manipulate me. Then I asked them to leave because I was tired of the interaction and had nothing more to say to them. I had initially allowed them into my house thinking that they might finally realize their mistake and be sorry for me. When I started getting angry at them and telling them to leave, they also started feeling offended and told me that I wasn't entirely innocent in the situation. Their defense was that when we lived together, I was always overenthusiastic, overinvolved in their lives, and often annoying. I don't even understand how this became a problem between them and me. I was just a teenager at the time, and I was just trying to stay connected to my family because they were alienating me, and then they started telling me that if I refused their demands, I was just as bad as them because I was forgetting that for so many years, my mother had raised me alone, and this was my chance to make it up to her and help her. But instead, I was acting ungrateful and disrespectful to everything they had done for me in the past. I thought it was stupid of them to bring it up, because I was still a child, and even if I wanted to lighten their load, I couldn't choose not to depend on them. I still needed to depend on them financially, and they weren't helping me. When they felt I was mature enough to live on my own, they pushed me out of the house, basically kicked me out, and refused to acknowledge my existence for the next 18 years. Even after all that, I still couldn't understand why they had the nerve to ask me for help after all they had done for me. After that, our arguments became very nasty and personal, and I started threatening to call the police if they didn't leave my house immediately. After a while, they did leave, but my mother has always told me that in order to be a good mother when she was young, she only wanted me to understand her situation once in her life and allow her to prioritize other people over me. She believes that I should have understood her more instead of rejecting her for so many years, and now it's obviously me trying to paint her as the bad guy instead of the other way around, which has always bothered me. I don't understand if I really was wrong, and as a result, I had too many expectations of my mother, or if she was just playing me. I'm pretty sure I'm right, but to be absolutely sure, I decided to post on Reddit and ask for your objective opinion. Ida refuses to pay for my half-siblings to go to college because I am estranged from my mother and stepfather, and they are currently in a bad financial situation. Edit: I have spoken to my uncle and told him that what he did was wrong and unacceptable. Even though his intentions were not bad, the effect of what he did was definitely bad. If he had not told my mother what I was doing in life and had not disclosed my contact details and address without my permission, I would not be in this situation at all. He apologized profusely and told me that he did not know that my mother would end up doing something like this, because even he did not know that they were in financial difficulties. If he had known, he would not have told them about my life. Even if he does not admit it, he should not have discussed these things with my mother, and if we want to solve our problems ourselves, we will do so without his interference. I don't plan on removing him from my life. After all, he didn't do anything wrong. If that were the case, I would be even more angry with him, but honestly, he just made a mistake, and he is the reason I was able to go to college in the first place, because no one else, except for him, was willing to step up and help me by taking on the responsibility of being a co-signer on the loan application. If you think about it, if it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be in the position I'm in now. I don't want to be ungrateful, but I'm not a pushover either, so I made sure to tell him that what he did was wrong. I think I struck a balance and was fair no matter what I did. Our relationship is totally fine. I don't hold it against him because I feel like I kind of needed it to end the way it did. I also talked to my grandparents about my mom's situation, and they agree with me and told me they'll find a way to get her to inherit the estate and leave me alone. They've been in contact with my mom the whole time because they don't want to lose contact with the other grandkids, which is understandable, and they can sympathize with what the family is going through, but they think what they put me through was wrong and unreasonable. So that's their stance, and I think it's fair. Update: it's been almost 9 days since I last spoke to my mom. Since then, she's been constantly reminding me of everything she did for me when I was a kid, sending me an email every other day, probably trying to make me feel like I owe her something. I don't really understand the point of it all, because legally speaking, she did everything for me as a matter of course. She didn't do me a favor by raising me on her own, and she didn't fulfill her duty. She did what was convenient for her. When I started to become a nuisance, she and her husband decided to get rid of me on the pretext of saving money and resources for their own future and that of their twins. Well, we are in the future now and the twins are grown, so I think they should rely on themselves instead of wasting time trying to guilt-trip me and manipulate me. I had not responded to the emails before, but a few days ago I decided to write back to her, and I told her everything I had said in this post, which apparently she did not take well, and again accused me of being ungrateful. I just told her that she could call me whatever she wanted. It would not change the facts, nor the fact that she is a terrible mother, and that is why I do not want to have anything to do with her anymore. After that, I blocked the email address she used to send me emails, but she created another one and tried to bother me again, so I dealt with that email address as well. And I will continue to do so until she realizes that I won't sit here and do it for her when she has never done the same for me. I'm glad we can be honest with each other now, because I'm sure this will all be over soon and I'll get the closure I need. I invited them to my home that day, and the only reason I spoke to them was because I still had a glimmer of hope that they might have changed and maybe they were there to congratulate me and bury the hatchet. But after speaking to them, I realized that people like them are even capable of feeling emotions like remorse, guilt, or shame, and it made me realize how selfish and manipulative people like them really are. I have now completely given up on reconciling with them. Update: earlier today, my mother showed up at my workplace, which I think might be the craziest thing she has ever done. Luckily, I wasn't at work today, so she left quickly and didn't get what she wanted. I took the day off because I felt a bit under the weather, and I'm glad I did, because I'm sure that otherwise, if I'd still been at work, she would have had a tantrum or done something awful to embarrass me. I was already very scared when I told the receptionist that I would speak to her personally, because I really didn't know what she would do, but when they put her on the phone, I told her that I was at home and that if she tried to do anything funny at my workplace, I would sue her so that she would not only be unable to send her children to college, but even unable to get them out of the house because of the shame and embarrassment. I think it really scared her because I did my best to sound intimidating, and I think it worked, because she immediately told me that she would only leave my workplace if I agreed to meet her. I told her that she was in no position to make demands because I knew she could not afford a lawsuit at the moment, and that if things got extreme, even my company would not hesitate to sue her, which would be a completely different because they won't be as lenient as I am. So she'd better not make a scene and leave. After I finished talking, she returned the phone to the receptionist. I guess she left because I didn't receive any calls or notifications from the company afterwards. But this time it was really very dangerous. I can't afford to have something like this happen again, so I decided to talk to a lawyer to see what precautions I can take. I'm not sure if this constitutes grounds for an injunction, as she hasn't threatened me, but I'm going to speak to a lawyer to see what options are available. Until then, I can only hope that the recent interactions have been bad enough that she will leave me alone now. Update 3: Hey, I don't think I need to worry about whether I should apply for an injunction, as I'm sure we have grounds to do so. Last week, my mother showed up at my workplace, and I managed to get her to leave me alone, but after what happened this week, I think everyone should apply for an injunction against her. A few days ago, when I got home from work, I saw her standing outside my front door. I immediately told her that I wasn't in the mood to argue with her and that if she didn't go away, I would call the police. I even picked up my phone and was about to make the call when she suddenly lunged at me, threw me to the ground, and knocked the phone out of my hand. She started trying to hit me while constantly cursing at me and blaming me for all the misfortunes in her life. It was all so crazy, I was taken aback, and it took a while before I tried to fight back, but when I did, I easily overpowered her, as I work out a lot and am much younger than she is. Luckily, my neighbors realized something was wrong, called the police because of the noise, and even came to my rescue themselves. They even held my mother down while we waited for the police to arrive. The police finally arrived, and I decided to press charges, so she's in a lot of trouble now. I've also spoken to a lawyer and applied for a restraining order against her. As far as I know, Harry has taken the kids to live with their parents, and I don't know if he'll be back anytime soon, because my grandparents said that after he bailed her out that day, she was charged with a misdemeanor, because I wasn't seriously injured. And he questioned what she did, and said she couldn't do that, but she started arguing with him, too. I think she just snapped because she is obviously going through a hard time and she can't accept that I am doing well in life. To be honest, she has brought this on herself. I refuse to feel sorry for her. Soon, I will apply for a restraining order against her. Also, I have been thinking about moving out of my house and into a bigger one. I make more money now anyway, so now is the perfect time. I think I can finally start looking at other options. I really hope my mother can deal with everything she's been through and try to be a normal person, because it's embarrassing being related to someone like that. Even my grandparents have told me they don't want to be in contact with her anymore because she's also been rude to them, so she only has herself to blame because everyone's distancing themselves from her. And it's not like it's any of my business anyway.